Welcome to the No Unfinished Business podcast. There are 1,000 different ways your clients can leave unfinished business, but no single advisor can address every issue. In every episode, we'll answer the important questions to help professional advisors focused on individual clients. Attorneys, CPAs, and financial advisors identify and eliminate those planning blind spots so you can speak competently and confidently to your clients and help them leave no unfinished business. Marc Whitehead, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, part of estate planning, we're normally thinking about what happens to our clients after they've passed. But people are living longer. Because they're living longer and maybe not always eating as well as they should, they're getting into more longer-term diseases. And one of the things that people have come up with is, well, let's have some long-term care insurance cover potential for me getting disabled one way or another. It seems so simple. We just throw money at a problem, and then if anything happens, declining health, accidents, something like that, the insurance will be there to save us. The good news and the bad news, I guess, is that you have a healthy practice dealing with disability denials. And so I think this is, for our listeners, a chance to know, well, what should we be looking out for? How could the process go awry? Because we've got insurance that may not want to pay out.
So the first thing is the way I look at it in my own mind is there's three types of long-term insurance out there that people should be considering carrying. The first is a split version. There's long-term disability insurance, which basically the function of long-term disability insurance is an income replacement in case you're unable to work. Now, people typically get it in one of two ways and can get it both ways. The most common way is you get it as part of your employee benefits package through your employer. So you go to work for XYZ Corporation, you get an employee benefits package, you've got the 401k, you've got the health care, you've got life insurance, dental, and all those fun little knickknacks. Well, usually as part of that, you also have long-term disability insurance, which will pay usually the short-term and a long-term component. And for the short-term, which is usually 6 months, if you're disabled and can't work, it will pay you 100% of your salary. After the 6-month period, then it converts over to what they call long-term disability insurance, where it usually pays 50 to 60% of your salary. I've seen it where you can buy up to at least 80% of your salary. 60% is kind of the norm. This insurance is relatively cheap. Your employer picks up most of the premium. You may pay a small portion of it. Most people don't even realize they have it, or if they do realize it, they're not paying a whole lot of attention to it because they're getting it when they first start a job and they're young and they're healthy, or at least they're like me, old and healthy. And it's just rolled into this package of benefits. There is a way to purchase long-term disability insurance individually, what we call individual disability insurance. And that is typically a better product. It is going to be a more expensive product. It is marketed heavily to professionals who may own their own practices. They market heavily to doctors, to dentists, to lawyers, anybody that may have a substantial investment in their education and have started their own individual practice. However, anybody can purchase this type of insurance, regardless of where you are. Typical carriers might be something like Prudential or Aetna, Cigna, Northwest, companies like that. So those are your first two of your long-term disability insurance. There is a third category called long-term care insurance. And now long-term care insurance is a little bit different. And its purpose is basically to cover you if you have to go into an assisted care facility, such as a nursing home or a rehab facility or something like that. Those typically, there's not a lot of dispute in those because it's kind of clear cut. You either are or not in a approved type of facility. So that's not really where the dispute usually ends up. I don't see many of those claims, although we see a few. And that's really, hopefully, that is something that's focused on people that are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. But what we see primarily are denied long-term disability insurance claims for various reasons. And I think that's probably the primary reason that you have me here speaking today, is because sadly, if insurance companies paid what they were supposed to pay all the time, then there wouldn't be any need for lawyers like me. But unfortunately, that's the way life is. So I always try to advise people, and there's lots of things to look for when you're purchasing one of these types of policies. And then if you're considering using the policy, then there's other things that you need to be doing to protect yourself. And I think it's primarily the message that I have when I speak to people on the topic. First of all, it's kind of a no-brainer. If your employer is offering it to you in your group plan, pay for it. And if you can pay an additional premium to up it from a 50 to a 60 or to an 80, pay for that. It's extremely cheap insurance. When you get it in a group environment, you can't be denied coverage. You certainly can be denied benefits, but they can't deny you coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Individual long-term care cover or long-term disability coverage, the IDI policy, is more expensive. And it is obviously, when do you plant a tree 20 years ago? Obviously, it's best when you purchase it at a younger age because you can get lower premiums locked in. But you can purchase it in your 50s. It is offered, but it starts to become more restrictive and more expensive. But what I've seen in my practice, and this is sort of surprising to a lot of people, at least in my world, but the vast majority of people who have to make claims on their long-term disability insurance policy, they're making claims based on progressive diseases, not off of accidents. A lot of people think of this as like insurance in case I have an accident. And that is true. It can happen. I mean, you could be run over by a bus or something like that and be disabled because of that. But that's a very small percentage of the claims that are actually made on disability insurance policies. The vast majority of claims made are people with long-term progressive diseases. And that raises some interesting questions and some interesting possibilities when you're thinking about planning into the future. A typical scenario would be, let's say, a doctor or dentist, somebody like that, who starts getting a neurological issue. And it starts off slowly. It starts off very slowly, but you see it coming. And what they see over time is that they become more and more limited in what they can do. When they'll start to have the shakes, do you really want a dentist drilling on you if they just have some minor shakes? Very easy for somebody that does any sort of physical component to their job. And doctors and dentists are kind of your prime suspects. Excuse me. They can see it coming a mile down the road that they're going to get there. But it could be other types of things. You could have your just under a general group policy, even somebody such as a secretary or a paralegal like we have in our office. They'll start to have long-term conditions. I've seen MS, Parkinson's. It could be cancers. It could be heart disease. It could be like a COPD breathing type issue. And it starts to get progressively worse over time, and they see it coming. And the reason that that's kind of important is because you kind of need to plan your claim, and you need to kind of set your claim up for success, because the ultimate goal, because there is a risk that if you make a claim, it will get denied. You want to set the claim up in such a way when you see it coming that you improve your odds of the claim being denied. So you never have to go through an appellate process of if your claim is denied. You want to set yourself up for success as best you can. And the more you can see it coming down the road, the better chance you have.
And yeah, it's something that the way I think about it when we're doing tax returns, we want to make it easy for the IRS agent who's going to be reviewing these estate tax returns to look at it once, say, that's interesting, stamp it complete, and then kind of move on to the next file without thinking too much about, am I going to get in trouble for having approved this?
Yeah, that's the thing, is you want to just anticipate and make it easy. You want to make it easy for them to grant the claim. That's the perfect way of putting it. I was just kind of thinking of some of the situations that we see arise. One of them is, unlike even in group claims, there is a pre-existing condition period within the policy, which the Affordable Health Care Act eliminated pre-existing conditions under healthcare policies, but they did not eliminate pre-ex conditions or limitations in disability insurance policies. So that is still a thing. And I see this happening when people come and they start to see they're having problems like, can I go get disability insurance now?
Mm-hmm.
Under certain circumstances, yes, you could, especially if it's a group plan, but they will have a pre-existing condition exclusionary period. And usually it's 2 years from the purchase or the institution of the policy, which again goes to planning. Let's say, just a hypothetical, let's say you get a new job, you get a new policy, you're hunky-dory, you're 6 months in, and all of a sudden 6 months in, you come up with Parkinson's disease. Okay. Let's say that you had some neurological, or you had some symptoms prior to, and those symptoms showed up in your medical records, say 6-8 months ago. Well, there's a look back period that the insurance company is going to look back. And if they look back into your medical history and they see that you're exhibiting symptoms, even though you may not have realized what the symptoms were prior to the institution of that policy, prior to the effective date of the policy, they're going to consider that a pre-existing condition and they're going to exclude coverage. What do you do about that? So this involves planning. Sometimes you have situations where the client can stick it out. Like, I want to stop working now and file for disability now. But if you're 3 months short of fulfilling your exclusionary period, can you hang on for 3 months? Can you continue to work? I know it might suck. It might not be the best situation. But if you want if you want to get past that 2-year limitation period, you might need to hold out before you actually file the claim. So in other words, when you start thinking about planning for disability, the date that you stop working and effectively that's the date you make the claim, even though you may not file the paperwork for weeks or months, but the date that you stop working is basically the effective date that you're filing the claim. You may have, if you have the physical ability, you may want to hang on for a month or 2 or 3 or 4. So you have to think about that and you have to know that. This is one of the big things that we see. We have a ton of people come to us that have been denied based on a pre-existing condition. And if I could have advised them ahead of time and I said, could you have stuck it out for another 3 months, another 6 months, and just waited till you got past that elimination period, we wouldn't have had this problem.
Really, just waiting.
They don't know that.
Right.
Just come to a lawyer, didn't ask anybody.
Yeah, just waiting a few more months if you can.
If you can, you got sometimes it's a matter of just holding out as long as you can. That's one of the things I see. The other thing I see is there are sneaky little provisions within these policies that limit benefits or exclude benefits altogether for certain types of condition. And people don't know this. The mental health limitation is a big one. Most policies limit insurance benefits for claims based solely on mental health, which is a big disabling condition. They limit it to 2 years. And people don't realize that. They think that they have benefits through their retirement age like they would if they had a physical condition. There are certain physical conditions that have limitations. Sometimes back injuries have a 2-year limitation. So if you're going to count on this income, you need to know what you've got before you start banking on it. You need to have a thorough evaluation of the policy. A lot of policies, actually most policies, have a shifting definition of disability after a 2-year period. For the first 2 years, you can't do your own occupation, which could be the example I gave you of a dentist. All he needs is the shakes and he's disabled because he can't do his own occupation. But after 2 years, if he has a shifting definition, the definition will shift to something like you can't do any occupation. Well, what does any occupation mean? And a lot of people get denied at that 2-year period when the definition shifts to a more difficult standard. These are things that you need to think about ahead of time. You can plan for it.
Right. So it's multiple qualifications then if there's the 2, not just now, but what happens 2 years from now.
Right. You're always trying to think ahead and stay ahead of it because there are ways that you can deal with some of these questions. For the pre-ex condition, can you stick it out? For the mental health condition, well, you do have other physical conditions that you could add on to that. And if you do, how well can you get them documented? There's a big difference between saying I have a back problem that's diagnosed by your general practitioner versus I have a back problem that's diagnosed and treated by an orthopedic surgeon. So sometimes upgrading the quality of the medical care and upgrading the quality of the diagnosis can make a big difference in how well you can establish your disability. Also, who is your doctor in general? A lot of doctors are very helpful and supportive of their patients. Sadly, a lot of doctors are not. They simply don't want to get involved in the legal system, or they don't feel that they are qualified to render an opinion based about whether or not somebody is disabled or not. And sometimes you have to combine a doctor's opinion and get a vocational expert to supplement what the doctor has to say. A doctor can basically say, this person has the following physical or mental or cognitive limitations. But a doctor is not really qualified to say whether those limitations prevent someone from working. You have to have that extra bit of proof, which is usually provided by a vocational expert, a trained, qualified vocational expert that says, all right, given the limitations that the doctor has said that are demonstrated by the evidence, given those limitations, can this person do their past work? Can this person do any other work?
Mm-hmm.
If they can do other work, does that other work pay enough to leave this person substantially in the same position that they would have otherwise been, which can sometimes be part of the policy. So that's part of the planning part of it, is you have to kind of get your experts lined up. Usually it's medical, and the most that most clients can do is get their medical experts lined up. Getting the vocational expert, if you ever need one, that's more of a question of finding an attorney who knows how to handle these claims to bring in that expert. That's a little bit beyond what an individual claimant can do on their own, but they certainly can work on getting the most qualified medical doctors who are willing to give good qualified medical evidence to help them.
Hey, Mark, and so, I mean, as we start to draw this to a close, are there things our listeners here are CPAs, financial advisors, other attorneys who clearly won't be the ones making these diagnoses, but is there anything that they should be on the lookout for, like watchwords that they may hear their client beyond just, I think I'm going to file my disability claim. Golly, I hope it goes well. Any other kind of precursor lead ups to start thinking about this?
Well, it's always good if you're advising people to ask their status. It's funny. I have had people come in and they'll ask me what I consider to be very personal questions, like, how's your marriage going? I'm like, today is pretty good. You could ask me yesterday. But the next question would be beyond that. It would be, how's your health?
Mm-hmm.
What is your job? Does your job have a physical component? I would ask those questions. Do you have insurance or disability insurance? What type of insurance is it? You can't do much about the group side because your employer has to offer it, but you can certainly supplement that with your own individual policy. And quite frankly, if I was a financial advisor, I would advise every one of my clients to go purchase their own individual policy, because it has better benefits. And quite frankly, it's less likely to be denied if it ever did become a close question. And that's a whole nother reason for that it would take me an hour to explain, but you always want to know the coverages that they have out there and where the gaps would be. But that becomes a pertinent question. How is your health? Do you have any conditions that, should be concerning us, that, particularly progressive conditions? You would be surprised at the number of people who are living with a very mild form of MS or a mild form of lupus that don't even think to mention it. They just deal with it. Or they've got a bad disc in their back or in their neck or something like that. Well, guess what? Those things progress and get worse over time. So you kind of want to know these things. How is your health doing? And then ask the hypothetical. Let's assume tomorrow that you're no longer able to work. What are you going to rely on? Are you just going to rely on your savings and investments? What do you have through your employer that could protect you? What have you purchased that could protect you? You obviously want to know that whole picture and see where the holes are. One of the big problems about group disability insurance is it only pays 60% of your former salary. That's a big hole. It's a real big hole. Now, if it's structured right, it should be tax-free money if they purchase it correctly. But sometimes they don't. But in theory, that's the rationale behind the 60%, is you're not having to pay taxes on it, which hopefully that's the case. But still, that still leaves a big hole. So you want to make sure that there's no holes there. But I would always be asking those and preface it by saying, I don't mean to be too personal, but this is important. Sometimes you even want to go into family history. Do you have a family history of Alzheimer's? Because Alzheimer's is known to be a hereditary condition. A lot of conditions are hereditary. So you want to ask family conditions.
Right. Well, super. And Mark, I think we've reached the end of our time for right now. Obviously, there's a lot more that we could be talking about. If folks are looking to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
So the problem is my mother couldn't spell, and she spelled Mark with a C. So the best way to reach me is to email me, but you just have to know that I spell Mark with a C to do that. So it's mark@markwhitehead.com. And it's Mark with a C on both sides of the at. I have to remind people of that. Or you can just give me a call at my office at 713-228-8888. Two twos and a bunch of eights.
Excellent. Mark, thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more episodes, videos, and links to more helpful content at nounfinishedbusiness.com. If you have any questions, feedback, or ideas for topics, please reach out via social media or email John at john@stromeyerlaw.com. And of course, if you or your clients need help from John with an estate planning, probate, trust, or cross-border tax issue, you can book time directly with John at askjohnaquestion.com.